Is everyone here familiar with what Chicago wilderness is? I know that it came up earlier, and Abigail asked some questions, and the speaker wasn't really familiar with Chicago wilderness. Does everyone here know what Chicago wilderness is? Yes? How about, does anyone not know? Does anyone have no idea what it is? Okay, I'll tell you very quickly. It is an organization. It's a consortium of over 320 organizations who work together to protect the nature of our region and kind of foster the connections between people and nature. That's not quite how the taglines say it, but that's basically what it is. So it's 350 organizations that are trying to work together, realizing we can do more by working together than we can separately. And we have a lot of initiatives going on, and as Bob said, I'm one of the co-leaders of our Green Infrastructure Task Force. And so this was to make sure you were awake. This is Green Infrastructure humor. This is not green infrastructure. And so the reason I said it was going to be a little bit of a shift is the things I'm going to talk about are going to go a little bit beyond kind of the forest, if you will, and the trees that we've been talking about so far today, looking at some of the other ecosystems we have in this region, but certainly the forest and the wooded ecosystems are a part of it. But real quickly, these kind of built best management practices are what many folks think of as green infrastructure. And I'm going to tell you that that's not how Chicago Wilderness thinks of it. We're thinking more broadly. We're defining green infrastructure broadly as the network of natural areas and other open spaces that together provide those ecosystem services that support our society. So it can include those kinds of site-specific best management practices that you would see at the individual building lot scale on the left-hand side here. But we're also thinking of things that you might do at a neighborhood or a campus scale. And we're thinking of things that you would do at a municipal scale, that municipal foresters may be thinking about. How do we plan the green infrastructure, if you will, of our whole community? And then finally at the watershed or even the regional scale, where Chicago Wilderness has put together a plan for the whole Chicago Wilderness region, which spans parts of 4 states, over 500 municipalities, I don't remember how many counties, a rather large area. And it started with the Biodiversity Recovery Plan, which was something that the consortium put together back in the mid-90s, that in a very text-heavy way outlined the ways that we thought what it would take to conserve the biodiversity of our region for future generations. And so it broke it down by various organismal groups and plant communities and all of that, and it addressed all that. And we saw the Green Infrastructure Plan as a way to graphically represent that on a map, what that would take to get there, so that we still had woodlands, forests, savannas, prairies, marshes, and whatnot for our future generations. And we relied on the concept of core areas, hubs, and corridors that was, I guess, really brought to the forefront by the Conservation Fund and in the book that's called Green Infrastructure by McMahon and Benedict. And so the way we built ours, very quickly to give you an idea what goes into this product, and then kind of the end goal here is to show you how we've been using this and how you all could use this maybe together with some of the other information that we've learned here today. So this just shows a map of Lake County, Illinois, this little subpart of our region, and it's showing our woodland and forest land cover type. We ended up dividing it up into 5 different cover types that we mapped. And so just to show you kind of what went into this, this is at a very different scale than everything we've been talking about here today. So the first thing we did was created a data layer that represented the forests and woodlands of our region. I won't get into the details of what that was, but we had the Conservation Fund as our contractor. We began with things like the National Land Cover data set, but then we worked from there into other derived data sets to figure out what was really accurate for our region, what made sense. We vetted it by all of our local land managers. And then we used various ecological criteria. So in the case of woodlands and forests, we used a size threshold. Anything less than 50 acres was taken out. We kept those that were greater than 50 acres on the notion that ecologically the size of the woodlot is important. But we also knew that we were aware of high-quality remnant areas that were smaller than 50 acres that were very important to the ecosystems of our region. So we put those back in, and that's what constitutes the core forest and woodland area then, anything that's over 50 acres or was known to Chicago Wilderness to be high quality. We also maintained another data layer that was all the additional forests and woodlands. And then we have the luxury of having good pre-settlement vegetation mapping for this region, mostly done by Marlon Bowles when he was here at the Morton Arboretum. And we also ran functional connectivity analysis to figure out where the best places were to add connections between those cores. So going back to the core, hub, and corridor concept to figure out where to put in those corridors. So very quickly then, I mentioned we had the 5 landscape cover types. Woodlands and forests was one of those. I've given you that as the example. Prairies, grasslands, and savannas with the other one. Wetlands, streams, lakes, and ponds. And then we had an urban green infrastructure layer that really was mapped at a different scale. But each one of those was constructed following a protocol very similar to what I just described to you. Those specific size thresholds may have been different. The source data layers may have been different. But that's basically how we built it, so that we ended up with core areas that were the highest quality, largest remnants in each of those land cover types that we could map across the region. And then for those that are a little bit familiar with this, I have in here some of our version issues. We tried following the software example, and I think it just confused us. But what we now call GIV stands for Green Infrastructure Vision. GIV 1.0 was the original product completed back in 2004. And then CMAP funded revising that, calling it 2.0 back in 2011 maybe. And then 2.1 was for the remainder of our Chicago Wilderness region. 2.2 was sewing that all together. And most recently, we've just completed an economic valuation study for the CMAP 7 counties that will apply then economic valuation monetized dollar values by 30 megapixels across the region for each of those 5 land cover types. So this is what the map looks like for the region. The green then is what we call our ecological network. So it rolls together actually at least 4 of those 5 layers. The urban GI layer is not included because, again, that's kind of mapped at a different scale. And that provides our ecological network. Now, getting to the implementation, how do we use these kinds of tools? This is just some examples where using this mapping to show us where our resources are can be adopted as a matter of policy. It can be integrated into mitigation requirements. It can be used in grant criteria, perhaps for more effective transportation planning, integrated into community comprehensive plans, which we think is very important and where a lot of work is being done right now. Really kind of the overall point being that when we got into this, we went out and started meeting with folks and with communities on using this tool, we found that communities knew where their gravel pits were, they knew where their golf courses were, but they had no idea where their oak woodlots were because you just didn't map natural resources. And so if they needed a new regional stormwater retention basin, they'd look at a map and say, well, this is vacant, doesn't have anything on it, let's put it here. And our mapping would reveal that, in fact, it was an oak woodland. And then they would realize, well, maybe that's not the best option for us to cut down our oak woodland to put in a regional retention basin and start to think about that. So, while on the surface, what I'm talking about may not seem like it relates quite as directly to a lot of the urban forest things we've been talking about today, I think that's the big usage here, is that we need to know what we have. And communities, some of them do. Some are very sophisticated, but many simply do not know what their natural assets are. They don't really know very much about their urban canopy. And so we have this tool that's available in many forms for anyone to use. Any community can download all the data, bring it into their own GIS system. There's also an online mapper that's available. CMAP currently houses the data, and that's where you could download it if you wanted to use it. And we're working on sort of revamping how that's done. Right now it's a little clunky. You have to email somebody and they send you back some information and then you can download it. The Field Museum has also turned it into an online interactive mapper that anyone can use. You can zoom in, you can pan, you can turn layers off and on, see what's in your community. But any of this data is available for anyone to use. And then we're also hoping to start to integrate into that as people collect more localized, refined data that we can add that in as we develop our own mapping with Bob and the Morton Arboretum and many others, better urban tree canopy data, that might be more refined than what we have in this. We'd like to be able to continue to have this be a dynamic product that any community, anyone can use then to help them with their own planning on where are these natural assets and what do we need to do, how can we use this to help us in our future planning. And so real quickly, we had a program called Sustainable Watershed Action Team, or SWAT Projects, and this map highlights where those occurred. This was where we went in, worked directly with the municipality or the county or the township to create their own stepped-down green infrastructure plan for their community, which oftentimes took all of our data and then added to it other local information like knowing where the local woodlots were that people thought were important, that were too small to be picked up when we mapped at a regional scale. Adding that all into these locally refined products, and then a lot of time that's adopted by a county board, it's adopted by a village board, it's integrated into their comprehensive plan, and that reduces, hopefully, the incidence of regional stormwater basins or the new Walmart going in on the last oak woodland in Community X. And the other thing that we've learned in that process is that kind of a hands-on map it big approach works best. We always do these workshops where we end up plotting out maps that literally measure 10 feet by 12 feet, and we put it out on a big table and we give people markers and pens and we let them draw all over the map and find where they live and find where their favorite oak tree is. And it achieves that buy-in, but that's also a way that you'll learn a lot of local information that you might not have known about that can then be incorporated into the product that's then used for planning in that local community. And so this is one example of this isn't actually the finalized version. This is in the Trail Creek watershed in Michigan City, Indiana, where Abigail and I were assisting them with some green infrastructure mapping for their community. It was actually driven by the sanitary district initially. And now they're looking at how do we use this to update all of our municipal code and use this to find the most important sites for demonstration projects. They're looking at what happens to their green infrastructure when indeed all the ash that lined many of their creek corridors are gone. And what effect does that have on the stream? What effect does that have on the flooding if those trees are no longer there? We had the luxury of an individual that works for a fellow consulting firm that happened to grow up in this area, and his concern was the whole eastern half of this is largely an oak-dominated sand dune area, and that's why everyone moves there. But when they move there, the first thing they do is cut down all the oaks on their lot, whack off the top of the dune, and build a house. And clearly, if everyone did that, then that wouldn't be the place everyone would want to move anymore now, would it? So we're hoping that by mapping out those kinds of resources, we'll help them plan for a more sustainable future for a community like Michigan City.